In any domain, if you can change something, you have power over it. If you can't, you don't. The first level of power is childhood, and everyone must go through it. It's the stage of every living species where you're the most vulnerable and exercise the least amount of power, mostly by being capable of changing just the immediate surroundings around you. It's also the time you're most dependent on your caretakers. The balance is asymmetric and mostly against you. A child only has power over the domain of their immediate surroundings, or sometimes not even that. And this isn't just about age. There are adults who never psychologically leave this stage. People who their entire lives only react to what's immediately in front of them. Never shape it, never plan beyond it. Level 1 isn't just a phase. For some people, it's a permanent address. The second level of power is average adulthood. Almost everyone experiences this too. You're now capable of influencing your immediate environment, traveling, and if prompted, planning, coordinating, and doing great harm to your surroundings and other humans. Average adulthood starts when you're mature enough to be somewhat self-dependent, and it ranges from being a peasant to a commoner. A peasant being someone at the lowest stage of the social and financial ladder, living on the roadside. No leverage, no seat at any table. A commoner being somewhat literate, socially accepted, and financially independent enough to participate in protests, sometimes shout, and occasionally get things done. Not low enough in the brutal hierarchy to be a peasant, but also not high enough to be an aristocrat. An average adult has power over their immediate surroundings and other average adults and children. And to be clear, most of the world is here. Most of the world has always been here. The reason this level feels invisible is because it's the water most people swim in their entire lives without ever questioning it. You can work a job, raise a family, vote in an election, and die, all from level 2. The third level of power is the aristocrat. Someone who is bureaucratically or economically powerful enough to purchase, move, or construct things in the real world. Buildings, institutions, or the policy that ultimately does that. An aristocrat can range from a low-level businessman or regional politician to a billionaire, or middle to early upper management of the political structure in any society. This is where it gets abstract. So examples from here. At this level, you start to shape the environment that other people have to live in, not just your own. A landlord who owns 50 buildings isn't just living his life. He's shaping the lives of hundreds of people who have to pay him to exist somewhere. A regional politician isn't just casting a vote. He's deciding what gets built, what gets funded, who gets a road and who doesn't. This is the first level where your decisions have consequences for people who never agreed to be affected by you. Now, some people would argue that a billionaire like Rockefeller belongs somewhere above this. That a man who controlled nearly 90% of all oil refining in the United States, who could move markets with a decision made at breakfast, who was at one point richer than entire countries. Surely that's a different category. And it's a reasonable instinct. But it's a misconception. And the reason people get it wrong is that they measure power by wealth. And wealth is just one variable. The real test is who can change who. At the peak of his power, John D. Rockefeller ran the most dominant corporate empire the modern world had ever seen. And then the Supreme Court of the United States ordered it dismantled in 1911. 1. Judicial decision. That's it. Standard Oil, gone. Not because Rockefeller ran out of money. Not because a competitor beat him. Because a group of people sitting at the level above him looked at what he built, decided they didn't like it, and ended it. He had no countermove. No amount of wealth gives you a countermove against the judiciary. That's the point. The aristocrat, no matter how wealthy, ultimately operates inside a structure he doesn't control. And the moment that structure turns its attention toward him, The gap between his level and the next one becomes very clear, very fast. The fourth level is the upper political figure. Someone who controls the billionaires and the lower or middle managers of the societal hierarchy below them. Vice presidents, chief justices, commanders. These are the people who don't just influence policy. They write it, interpret it, or enforce it. Crucially, they can use it against the aristocrat. Billionaire can spend a decade lobbying for something. An upper political figure can approve it or kill it with one signature. A five-star general doesn't just command soldiers, he commands the entire apparatus that decides where and how force gets used. At this level, the rules of the game are no longer something you navigate around. You are one of the people writing them. That's a different kind of power than anything below it. And here's something most people miss about. This level, the upper political figure, often has less visible wealth than the aristocrat below him. A Supreme Court justice doesn't look powerful if you're measuring power in net worth, but he can nullify the net worth of the richest man alive with a ruling. Visibility and power are not the same thing. The further up this ladder you go, the more those two things diverge. The fifth level is the topmost political figure. Presidents, kings, prime ministers, they control the second in command, and everyone downstream of that. A decision at this level doesn't affect a region or an institution. It affects an entire country, and usually the countries around it too. One phone call can start a war. One decision can sanction an economy into collapse. One signature can release someone from prison or put them in one. History books are mostly written about this level, not because these people are the wisest or the strongest. Plenty of them aren't, but because their mistakes and their victories are too big to stay contained. When a level 2 person makes a bad decision, they suffer. When a level 5 person makes a bad decision, a generation suffers. And there's something worth saying here about the difference between level 4 and level 5 that most people blur together. A vice president, a chief justice, a commander. These people have enormous power, but it's still largely institutional. It's derived, it flows from the office and the system around them. A president or a king at the peak of their authority can, under the right circumstances, act outside the institution entirely. They can pardon, they can declare emergency, they can go to war without a formal declaration. The topmost political figure is the last point where one human being can make a decision that affects millions of other human beings, with essentially no one above them to veto it in real time. The sixth level is the Emperor Gennaro. These don't exist anymore, not because the world outlawed them, but because the role diverged. It split into pieces that no single person is allowed to hold all at once anymore. Napoleon, Alexander, prime examples. Complete material control over almost every domain of human experience. The army, the treasury, the law, the map itself, redrawn by their own hand. Alexander was a military general, a head of state, and a living god in the eyes of his people. Simultaneously, Napoleon rewrote the legal code of an entire civilization while actively commanding its armies on the battlefield. The reason we have checks and balances, separation of powers, term limits, all of that is specifically to make sure this level never happens again in a modern state. The world looked at what one person with total material control could do and decided to split it up on purpose. But even here, even at this peak of material dominance, notice what's missing. Every emperor general in history was backed by an idea bigger than himself. Alexander had Aristotle before he had an empire. Napoleon wrapped himself in the legacy of Rome and the ideals of the French Revolution. The empire outlasts the emperor only when the idea behind it survives him. And that idea always came from the next level. The seventh level is the philosopher and the sage. Complete ontological control. Only a handful of people in all of recorded history ever reached this level. Jesus, the Prophet Muhammad, Buddha, Laozi, and maybe the Greek philosophers, Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. The civilization builders, the emperors, the generals, are almost always backed by them. We're no longer talking about material control. They influenced what it means to be human, and what the universe is all about, whether you accept any of them or not. And this isn't a religious claim. This is just history. Look at the empirical record with no belief attached, and the influence is undeniable. It's in how we greet each other. It's in the calendar on the wall, still counting years from an event 2,000 years ago. It's in how states are structured. The idea that a ruler answers to something higher than himself came directly from this level. It's in how armies are told they can and cannot fight, what a just war is, what a war crime is, how a prisoner should be treated. All of that traces back to theologians and philosophers at this level working it out on paper centuries before any modern law existed. The concept of individual conscience. The idea that every human being has inherent worth regardless of their status. The entire framework of human rights. You follow that thread far enough back, and it lands at this level every single time. It's in your holidays, your wedding vows, your funeral rites. The words you use for good and evil, right and wrong vocabulary you reach for every day without thinking about it. Inherited from conversations that happened thousands of years ago, in rooms none of us were ever in. No billionaire has that kind of reach. No president, no emperor with 1 million soldiers ever had it. Because armies only ever controlled land. These people controlled how entire civilizations think. And that has lasted for thousands of years. And it is still going right now, in real time, in your life. Whether you're aware of it or not. When the conversation shifts from money, policy, and territory to the actual trajectory of the human species. Not a country, not a century. The species' history only gives you a handful of names capable of bending it. That's not a spiritual claim. That's just what happens when you count. And then there's an 8th level, metaphysical power. This is where human power ends and metaphysical power begins. But that requires a video of its own.